Thank you very much. Wow, that was loud. Okay, so yeah, look, I'm here to talk about Web3, the great con. Look, I'm the CTO and co-founder at ClimateClever. I love JavaScript, all things JavaScript, and have a bit of a passion for environment and privacy. I just obviously like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're gathered on here today, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Okay, so I think it's really, really important to just set the tone before I jump into this talk, because I've already had some interesting feedback. So it's okay if you disagree with the things that I say in this talk. We're allowed to disagree. We don't all have to think the same thing. However, what I'm really going to be talking about today is not really my opinion, although there's a little bit of my opinion sprinkled in there. Most of these are facts and issues that we actually need to look at, and they need addressing. We can't just ignore them. So yeah, just keep that in mind. We're allowed to disagree. If you want to come talk to me later about stuff, you're more than welcome to, but you won't be able to change my mind. Hopefully I can change yours. But hey, let's have a quick look at what we're going over today. Ooh, that was weird. Why is it, hang on a sec, seems to be just going itself. So strange. Let's try again. Okay, cool. So agenda. So I'm going to give you a little overview of blockchain, crypto, NFT, and Web3. We're going to talk about ransomware, energy use, proof of stake, fraud, decentralization, censorship, privacy, and we're going to end with the financialization of everything. Now, that's a lot, and these are all very deep, big topics that deserve their own talk. So we're going to dip into them a little bit, just so you can walk away with some good knowledge. Okay, so let's talk about blockchain. What does that even mean, for those of you who don't know? So the best way to think about it is an Excel sheet, right? So an Excel sheet can sort of simulate a blockchain, and every row that's added to that Excel sheet is like another block in the chain, right? So it's like a ledger, a digital ledger. And the best way to also think about it is that each row added in the Excel sheet, or each block added to the chain, normally refers to the block that came before it. And it does that using some form of cryptography or cryptography. Always get those two words mixed around. Okay, and another thing to think about is transactions are normally irreversible. So if a block has been added to the chain and you want to change it, you normally have to change every single block that comes after it. And that's often referred to as forking the chain. So that's a very brief overview of what blockchain is. So let's talk about crypto, because that's probably the biggest use of blockchain, okay? And where shall we start? We'll start with Bitcoin, which is the biggest and the original. So for those of you old enough to remember, we had the wonderful banking crisis in 2008, where the banks basically ripped us all off and the governments failed to regulate them properly. So out of that arose Bitcoin. It was supposed to be an end to centralized banking, so peer-to-peer currency. And your crypto wallet would work like a bank. But the biggest difference is that it would be protected and safe against cash crises like inflation or deflation that we experience with centralized currency. So it was supposed to be, this thing that would liberate us all. Now, obviously, its biggest and best, probably first use was Silk Road, where you could buy drugs online and get them in the post a week later. Now, blockchain itself and Bitcoin at this point were slow and expensive to use. So the trade-off for getting drugs in the post with those high transaction fees and slow transaction times was kind of worth it. Obviously, Silk Road was eventually shut down. Now, Bitcoin also uses something called proof of work to add blocks to the chain. So in real simple terms, what that means is that the miner nodes compete to solve an algorithm based on the data inside the block, and then it gets added to the chain, and that's called proof of work. But that process of computing the data in the algorithm is energy intensive, and that's why it's called proof of work, because you have to prove that you've wasted some time and done some work. And we'll talk a bit more about that in a bit. Okay, so let's talk about Ethereum. So probably the second biggest crypto blockchain thing after Bitcoin. So it was created by Vitalik Buterin and launched in 2014. There were other co-founders involved as well. It boasted lower fees and faster transactional times. And the interesting thing about Ethereum is it could track blocks of data, not just the Ethereum coin. And these blocks of data can be used to store programs, often little bits of code, whatever you can think of. And Vitalik had a vision. He envisioned a future where the whole internet was rewritten, where it was all decentralized, bypassing governments and banks and other centralized services. Your very identity could be stored on the chain. A term that comes up a lot, and we're going to talk about it, is banking the unbanked and the forgotten, which personally I'm not too sure what that actually means, but we'll talk about it. Okay, so I've shared this quote from, it's doing that, sorry, I do apologize, it's doing that thing where it's like skipping slides. Okay, so I've shared this quote from Vitalik, so I'll read it to you. "I cried myself to sleep, and on that day I realized what horrors centralized services can bring." Now, that sounds pretty drastic, right? So you'd think he'd be talking about something absolutely devastating. But it turns out he's talking about World of Warcraft. So he used to play World of Warcraft, and he logs on one day to find that his favorite mage wizard character's favorite spell has been nerfed by the dev team because the dev team thought it was too effective. And that was his reaction. And I haven't posted this to make fun of him. Like, we've all got way attached to something in our lives. I've definitely got attached to video games in the past. But I think it's worth sharing because it's interesting looking at the sort of thought process that's happening inside the head of a lot of the people working in the Web3 space. Okay, so NFTs. I'm pretty sure you've all seen NFTs over the last few years. They really exploded during COVID, or non-fungible tokens is their full name. It's a way of proving that something is unique. From a technical perspective, they're just a serial number that can't be split into smaller parts, right? So, if you have two NFTs of the same thing, they're going to have different serial numbers. So if you took a picture of me right now waving my arms and we turned that into an NFT, the first one would have one serial number, the second one would have another serial number. And it's a bit like prints of a painting. So when you have a painting and you make prints, the first one is worth the most, the second one a little bit less, and third, and so on and so forth. Now, NFTs, often referred to as tokens that digitalize something, can also store small packets of data or code, and these are often referred to as smart contracts. Now, NFTs are supposed to be a revolution where they could liberate artists from the gig economy, they could be used for identity, tickets, ownership, and more. And I'm just going to, once again, just step out of our little timeline here to talk about another tweet from someone in the NFT space, which just find a little confusing. So NFTs equal identity 2.0. Can't remember the last time I used my picture on the left. And I'll read these out to you. Emphasis on physical traits, genetic lottery, prone to bias and prejudice. And then under his NFT, identity by choice, unique and digitally scarce representation of values and beliefs. Now I'm going to put aside the fact that the NFT looks like something that we used to make in MS Paint at high school. And the thing is, Santiago has a vested interest in you believing this is the case because he paid the equivalent of $171,000 US for that NFT on the right. So quite interesting. Okay, so last technical term, and then we're going to delve into the juicy bits. So Web3. So Web 1 is like static content. The web in the early days where you would read stuff, on the internet. You didn't interact with it. Web 2 is users creating content. So like YouTube, social media, we make videos, we make posts. It's a much more service-orientated internet. Web 3 is supposed to be this new revolution in the crypto space where users control their data and content. Things are more distributed, and it's not controlled by big corporations. Now, the thing is, I actually agree with some of that, terminology being used there. I do believe we should all control our own data, and I also believe that having all the power in a few tech companies is a bad idea. But I really disagree with the execution. Okay, so time to spread some FUD. What's FUD, Alex? So in the crypto space, when you spread negative thoughts or sentiment or point out critical issues in a project, you often get accused of spreading FUD. You're preventing us all going to the moon and buying Lambos or whatever they say. So let's spread some FUD. Okay, let's talk about ransomware really quickly. Ransomware is a terrible thing. right? We are seeing schools, hospitals, energy supply pipelines being held to ransom by cyber criminals, and most of the time they have to pay in Bitcoin to get their data back once it's been stolen and encrypted. We even have individuals. I mean, I'm sure there's some of you in this room with grandparents that have had their data stolen and been, held at ransom. It happens all the time. And this is a $5.2 billion a year industry. That is insane. In fact, that number has probably gone up since I made this slide. And it's worth pointing out that this industry is only as big as it is because of things like Bitcoin. Because the thing is, if you get held to ransom with your data, and they say, transfer $20,000 to us, please. If you go down to your bank to do that, online or in person, they're going to have questions about transferring $20,000. They're not going to just let you do it. And the thing is, if they know that the receiver is a known criminal or on their sanctions list, they're also not going to do it. The thing is, by creating things like Bitcoin, we've actually created loopholes around our centralized services, allowing industries like this to flourish. Now, look, I'm not going to be the first one to defend banks. They have screwed us over a lot. Just look at 2008, for example. But the thing is, centralized services exist for a reason. Security, sanctions, and laws need to be paid attention to. And look, they're not always perfect, but the thing is, we do have democratic governments, so we can try and get people elected that make it better, rather than creating loopholes that create industries as predatory as this. So let's talk about energy and environment, possibly my favorite topic, because I work in the climate space. Now, we're going to talk about Bitcoin first, and for those of you who work in the space, don't worry, we'll get to environmentally friendly crypto coins as well. But we need to talk about Bitcoin because it is the biggest and the worst. Right, so Bitcoin uses 0.5% of the world's power, just for Bitcoin. That is a tremendous amount of energy. It uses more energy annually than Argentina. And then the second factor that I think is really, really important, it produces more e-waste than the Netherlands. Right, so Bitcoin is responsible for supply shortages in chips, SSDs, and more. Right, so when the PS5 came out, and you couldn't get one. I mean, obviously, COVID played a part. But it was also due to Bitcoin miners using all these chips. That's why people couldn't get a PS5. And personally, I don't want to live in a world where you can't get a PlayStation 5 when you want one. And there's something else to be said. Now, I'm not going to debate this. Climate change is real. If you don't believe this, then you can ignore this part of the talk. But we have to transition to renewable energy in Australia. I mean, in other countries, they may have to use nuclear, but in other parts of the world, we've all got to transition, right? We have to do it. And there is only so much energy in the world. And one of my arguments here is you really can't afford to waste energy on a speculative system like Bitcoin when we have to transition to save our future. And it's also worth noting that only a few days ago, just as I was doing another practice, the White House tweeted that they are actually looking at proof-of-work blockchains and considering banning them because they're going to prevent them from reaching their environmental targets. And Bitcoin is really bad. So many dormant or near-dormant fossil fuel-fired power plants are restarted to mine Bitcoin. A power plant in New York increased its emissions by 6% and heated up a local lake when they started mining Bitcoin. And we're seeing this all the time. There's so much greenwashing going on. We've got fossil fuel companies bringing in big rigs of Bitcoin miners and attaching it to gas burn-off to power it. We're making fossil fuel companies more profitable. So, inevitably, people can be like, Alex, you keep talking about Bitcoin, which uses proof of work, which, remember, is that complicated algorithm process to add a block to a chain. Now, there are environmentally friendly cryptocurrencies as well, and they tend to use something called proof of stake. So it's more efficient because it doesn't scale in cost and time like proof of work, but it does make participation expensive. So basically, validation is achieved by how much a user has to stake. So for example, you need to hold a certain amount of the crypto or tokens to be able to add blocks to the chain. So that makes it really easy for someone with a lot of money to own the entire chain, which begs the question, is it really decentralized then? So it's not as secure as proof of work. Now, Ethereum currently uses proof of work, and is apparently going to be switching to proof of stake for the last 7 years, but they haven't. However, they've made a big announcement this month that they're finally going to do it, and it looks like they might actually do it this time, and that would make Ethereum environmentally friendly. However, that's not where my beef ends. So let's talk about fraud and scams. Now, what I'm about to talk to you is all facts and is a serious problem. $10.68 billion has been lost to scams or grifts since February 2021. This is out of date. I made this slide 2 weeks ago. It has gone up since then. So let's have a look at the scams that happen. So rug pulls, these are really common. So it's where a developer or a company raises tokens and then makes a run for the door with investments, right? So a good way to think about this, a startup, you have an idea, you build an MVP, you raise investment, you build the product, you grow the value of the company. Well, in the Web3 space, what happens a lot of the time is that people have vague plans for a video game or a product or something, and then they raise all these tokens, and then they just cash out and disappear, and they shut down all the social media sites, they shut down the website. I mean, this one's fantastic. Air Moon rug pulls for $6.3 million. I mean, besides being a blatant Pokemon ripoff, like, it's just, or my favorite one, Martin, the wonderful pharmaceutical guy from America who jacked up the price of a much-needed drug. Once he got out of prison, he started his own NFT project and got hacked, and all the money disappeared. Very interesting. Or this one, Bribe Protocol team disappears after raising $5.5 million. I mean, one, the amount of money that they raise is insane, but the fact that they just disappear and most of the time get away with it is really bad. Now, let's talk about lies, because this happens a lot, and I think it's really worth addressing. So, Celsius Network is like a bank savings account, except the idea is you put your crypto in it. So if I have some Bitcoin or Ethereum, I can lend it to Celsius in like their account, and they loan it out to other people, and I earn interest on my crypto being with them. Now, it was touted as being safer than a bank, the new type of investments, but in the crypto crash this year, they suspended all withdrawals and swaps in June, and then in July, they filed for bankruptcy. Now, they've been accused of being a Ponzi scheme, but during their bankruptcy hearings, people have written in to explain the losses that they've suffered. Now, I've stayed up late at night reading some of these, and they are brutal, right? They are absolutely devastating. Some of them talk about suicide and really dark things. Now, I've filtered out some of the darkest ones, but I've included 3 that I want to read to you because I feel it's important to understand the position. So, my name is Brandon Lawrence. I'm writing the letter for the same reason as many. I am one of the little guys. I put my life savings and trust into Celsius & Co. Even worse, I took out a margin loan on Robinhood for 50 grand for a Bitcoin at its near high, and I sent it to Celsius to offset the monthly margin interest. I also sent a Bitcoin from when I was buying a little bit here and there around 2018 and up. It was my nest egg. Now when I go to work, I drink water, eat any scraps I can find for lunch. Every day, I'm still paying for the Bitcoin I do not have with interest. I'm in deep depression and do not know if I can pull myself out of this. Here's another one for you. Both my wife and I are depositors in Celsius and have 3 young boys, aged 11, 17, and 20. We are unaccredited USA investors and were lured into Celsius based on promises directly from the CEO that our deposits are safe and can be withdrawn at any time. The CEO of Celsius stated several times that Celsius is safer and better than a bank, and those sentiments were reflected in their advertising. Now, there is one more, and just to give you a warning, there is a mention of domestic violence, just to let you know, just for any of those who might be triggered by past experiences. During my life, I've escaped domestic abuse perpetrated within a 28-year marriage, raised an orphan as an older adult without any support. I've survived a brain tumor while coping with polycystic kidney disease, debilitating arthritis, and extreme fibromyalgia. During the years of raising my son as a single mother, I scrimped and saved for a meager retirement. Regretfully, I placed 70% of my funds in an earn account in the Celsius network. Now, as a single senior citizen, I face kidney dialysis, Additionally, I'll be forced to sell my home, return to work, and possibly rely on government relief to make up for this deception. Now, I know that some of you in this room will be thinking, hey, you should only invest what you can afford to lose. And I think it's really, really important to point out that that is victim blaming. Celsius lied to these people. They defrauded them. They sold them false promises. They told them things were safe and their money was in good hands. They were lied to. So if this pops into your head, please just throw it away because it's an invalid argument. It is victim blaming. And I think another thing to think about here is we live in a society which isn't fair. There are systems that when you end up in poverty, keep you down. And the chances are most of you in this room might never have experienced poverty. We work in tech, which gives us access to a relatively good lifestyle. But the thing is, when you're in poverty, all you can do is think about how am I going to get out of this? Where's my next meal going to come from? And when someone comes along promising the world and saying to you, I've got the solution that's going to break you out of the system, that's going to stop you from being poor, you're going to take that because you're looking for that ray of hope. So I really hate this whole sentiment that you should only invest what you can afford to lose, especially when the companies selling the future are lying. So yeah, look, there's more scams. Insider trading. So staff at Coinbase have been accused of buying tokens before they list. So Coinbase is a platform where you can buy and sell cryptocurrency. Ponzi schemes, endless projects returning profits from new investors to old investors. Wash trading, so that's kind of like where multiple accounts owned by the same or multiple people sell NFTs between them to inflate the price. By the way, all of this stuff that I've just mentioned with normal securities, so like stocks and bonds and companies, it's against the law. If you do insider trading, wash trading, you go to jail. There is a whole regulation industry set up to prevent it. And look, it doesn't always work, but it's illegal. And the thing is, this industry doesn't have any laws to protect it, to protect normal, everyday people. Now, we are starting to see some punishments in America and other places, but so many people are still getting away with all these terrible things. We also have copyright issues. Artists who were supposed to be liberated by NFTs getting angry when their work is stolen and minted and sold as an NFT without their permission. And I think my favorite part about this is when they go to complain, they get laughed at or chastised, saying it's their fault for not doing it sooner and being part of the future. You know, theft. Because in crypto, we're not using banks, you're supposed to be your own bank, it's so easy to scam and fraud people, dropping NFTs into people's wallets that when they click it, drains out all their money. Now, I could really go on about all these, but one, I'll be having a classic Alexander rant, and two, it does get quite depressing. But I think it's worth mentioning here that crypto is zero-sum by design. Now, what does that even mean? I have to admit, when someone first explained it to me, I was like, what? But the best way to think about it like this. When you buy a stock in a company, the company generates value because it sells a service or it develops a product, so more people become interested in it, more people buy it, so the value grows, right? So you get value because it's generated value. In crypto, that's not how it works, right? Blockchain doesn't, and Bitcoin don't generate value. They're not making anything. So your only chance to make money is to buy low, sell high. But because it isn't generating value, when you sell at a high than when you bought, you need someone else to put money in for you to get out, which means it's zero sum, because for you to take money out, someone has to put money in. But when you take into consideration miners and exchanges that extract money from the system, it makes it strictly negative sum, which is really weird because we now have this system where we've got all these fraud and scams, it's zero sum by design. It almost sounds like a multi-level marketing scheme. And this kind of gets backed up by these wonderful celebrities here doing all these wonderful crypto ads. For those of you who've not seen it, Matt Damon's ad where he compares investing in crypto to landing on the moon and basically calls us all cowards for not investing has to be the worst advert I've ever seen. Or the Larry Super Bowl ad. Don't be like Larry, start investing today. Or Paris Hilton on late night talking about their NFTs. Because this is the thing, it doesn't generate value. So to keep money coming in, they have to keep the hype train going, or otherwise it stops. So let's explore this decentralized thing. So we're going to shift lanes a little bit here. So we've talked about the fraud and scams and things, but let's talk about decentralized. So that's one of the big touts, that it's decentralized, we own it, it's not owned by people. But most of the major services in the Web3 space are run on centralized servers and just query the blockchain with an API. If a miner owns 51% of a network, is it really decentralized? And these are things that are all worth thinking. If you have to have a bank account and go through a centralized exchange to use a Web3 app, is it decentralized? I have to admit, I set up a MetaMask wallet myself, and it took me about half an hour, and I'm a developer, so God knows how we're going to get normal people to do it. So I think Moxie here sort of helps me with my decentralized argument. So Moxie is one of the founders of Signal. So he created this NFT. If you want to go figure out how he did it, it's up on his Twitter. But basically, it looked different based on where you viewed it. So if you viewed it on OpenSea, one of the biggest centralized platforms for buying and selling NFTs, it looked one way. And if you looked at it on Rarible, another. But if you looked at it in your crypto wallet, it rendered out as a poo emoji, which is just absolutely fantastic. But this is funny. He was delisted from OpenSea for violating their terms and conditions, but I thought it was a censorship-free, decentralized system. But it gets even better. Then his crypto wallet stopped showing the NFT because it turns out his crypto wallet just queried OpenSea's API to check for the NFT's existence. So none of that is decentralized. That's all using centralized services. So let's dig into censorship resistance a little bit. Now, I want to start by saying I am a firm believer in freedom of speech. You have the right to say whatever you want. And I think that should be a right. And it's very depressing in other countries where governments use their power to suppress that. But the thing is, freedom of speech does not give you freedom of consequences. And also using your freedom of speech to suppress other people's freedom of speech is plain wrong. And I think we need to talk about this censorship-resistant blockchain, because the thing is, there is stuff out there that needs censoring, right? Content moderators that work for YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, they don't last very long in their job censoring the content that gets uploaded. And they see the worst of humanity. There are some dark places in our society, child porn, animal violence. This stuff is real, and it happens all the time and needs to be censored. If we create a censorship-resistant complete system, we are going to allow child pornography, hate, racism to just spew out all online, which isn't really a great place. And let's expand on that a little bit and talk about the death of privacy. So I'm a big privacy advocate. I go out of my way at the startup I work at to try and respect privacy as much as possible, even building analytics in a different way, all that sort of stuff. And privacy is important, and blockchain often gets touted as it's more secure, it's the data in your hands. And look, we should have data in our hands, I agree with that. But the thing is, it's not really private, because I cannot stress this enough, it's a public ledger. Everything you do is visible to the public. Now, if you don't connect that identity to anything in the real world, sure, it gives you the ability to harass and annoy and disappear, right? But the second you start connecting it to anything in the real world, or someone figures out that that wallet belongs to you, everything you do is going to be available for everyone to see. We're talking privacy violations way worse than Google and Facebook have ever committed, especially when you've got things like this. Ethereum co-founder says we'll soon use soul-bound tokens to verify things like school and employment, all stored in a Sol's wallet. I don't even know what any of that means. But the thing is, once we start attaching things like that to the blockchain, that's there forever. Because remember, it can't be deleted. Even if it's forked, it can still be found. You know, accidentally take a photo with your credit card in the background, that's up there forever. Somebody uploads revenge porn of you, that's up there forever. It's never going away. And I think there's another thing worth mentioning is that most of the people working in this space are straight white men like me. And we don't experience harassment, stalking in the same way that people of color or women do. We just don't. And the thing is, that stuff will become easier to do. Like I said, privacy will disappear. So we're running short on time because we started a little bit late. So let's just cool off a little bit, Alex, and we'll go into financialization of everything. So one of the end goals of the Web3 space, right, is that everything is on the chain. Everything you do is on the chain. We're incentivized for our time with earning tokens. You pay for everything on the chain. And I think one real good example of this is Axie Infinity, which is a video game using NFTs and blockchains. It's pretty much just Pokemon. It's Pokemon with NFTs. So the way it works is you buy or rent 3 NFTs called Axies, and then you battle them, and you earn tokens for battling, and you can use those tokens to breed more Axies, or you can cash out for real money. Now, it's very expensive to get started. Like when it first started, it was very low. It costs a few $100s at least to set up one team. One thing you can do is set up a bunch of teams and rent them out to people, and then you earn 50% of whatever they're doing. Now, they've got a lot of good press about how they help people in the Philippines earn money. You know, it's like, hey, these people are now earning money, you know, playing a video game. But the thing is, play to earn is not play to have fun. So when we had the crypto crash earlier this year, they saw their player numbers drop massively because people were just using it to earn money. They were just grinding to earn money. And when you take into consideration there's lots of whales, so that's people with lots of money renting out NFTs, earning 50% of the money they're earning, it almost sounds a bit like a sweat factory. But let's investigate that good press on how many people in the Philippines make money earning playing the game. Only 23% of adults in the Philippines have a bank account, right? So remember, you need a bank account to buy crypto and play crypto and work with crypto. So how many people are we actually helping? I feel that's one of the things that we do in tech a lot. It's like, this solves this problem. We should do it, but we never actually talk to the people we say we're helping. You know, and I think an example outside of the Web3 space, and you might hate me for this, and this is okay, is Elon Musk's satellite system for internet, right? Like, he's like, oh, we're bringing internet to people in the regions. Have we asked them what they want? Is internet top of their list? I'm pretty sure that if you talk to most people living in the regions, they'd be like, 24-hour access to doctors and nurses, more public surfaces and infrastructure that isn't falling apart and 50 years old, you know? Not saying the internet isn't important, but it's one of those things where like, let's just shove a whole bunch of satellites in the atmosphere every year and not think about the consequences because apparently we're doing some good. And in the end, it's people that lose, right? Like it's people that get left out. It's people that suffer the consequences of us just charging ahead and doing something. I think not a week goes by where people aren't like, oh, let's stick this on the blockchain. For example, let's put power distribution on the blockchain. That will make things better. But then who decides when we disconnect someone when they're struggling with finances? Who decides that we keep someone connected to the power because they've got medical devices? If we create this decentralized system, a really good example is if you take Synergy, our state-owned power company, and you compare that to all the private companies over East, which is a little bit like a blockchain. They all don't really work together that well. They all do whatever they want. Our disconnection rate in WA for people in financial hardship is much lower because we have a centralized system working together. You know, look at MySpace, the environment space. Everyone's like, oh, if we put offsets on the blockchain, it fixes them. You know, we need carbon offsets to offset some emissions that are unavoidable. But the thing is, the industry is rife with lies, fraud, kicking people off their own land in third world countries. And the thing is, how does sticking that on the blockchain fix it? One, it doesn't stop people lying before they put data in there. And all it does is create another financial market on top of the other. And I think that's the biggest thing that I want you guys to take away from this, is that tech alone isn't going to save us. We have to actually trust each other and work together and stop just pushing ahead with tech because it seems cool or fun. So please, just remember, we can trust each other, we can work together, and centralized systems are important too. I'd like to thank some of these amazing people that I got some of the content for this talk from, because I feel like although I read and work in this space a bit, these people are far more experienced than I am. Molly White, in particular, is probably the coolest person you could ever meet and kicking ass and documenting some of the terrible things happening in this space. And I'd also like to thank our sponsors for today at DD Perf. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. We've got about 5 minutes before there's morning tea in all the foyers. The next session is starting at 11:25. So is there anyone who's got a question for Alex before we wrap up? Cool.
Oh, dear.
So the hype train's real. How do we get investors in startups to avoid throwing cash at shiny things that have Web3 and crypto in them?
Ooh, see, so that's a difficult question, right? And I don't have a perfect answer for that because I work for a startup too, and I've seen other companies just come along with a wild idea, get millions of dollars, and we only ever got a few 100,000 to start with. So I think there's that thing where it's like you have to look at, is endless growth always a good thing? Can I bootstrap a startup with income first before I go to investors? And just try and avoid those investors, which means less stuff will be built that doesn't have Web3. But hey, maybe we have a slightly better society for it as well too.
Yeah. Awesome answer. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'd just be curious in your opinion on whether there exists maybe a possibility for some sort of decentralized financial product. For example, I'm thinking of the problems on the internet with the MasterCard and Visa stranglehold on certain services.
Yeah, so I do have an answer for this, and some of you might not like it. So I agree, things like internet and payment, actually internet infrastructure, not just payment infrastructure, is a necessary for today's world, right? Just like electricity and water are a necessity. So maybe it's time that certain infrastructure isn't actually owned by private companies anymore, but actually a public-owned good. Now, look, yeah, governments have some bad reputations for running things, but the thing is, maybe that's actually what starts to need to happen. Maybe we need a publicly owned payment infrastructure. Maybe we need publicly owned internet and server infrastructure, because the thing is, we actually need it to function. And maybe it's time we modernize our governments a little bit to make that possible. Thank you.
Fantastic. Any other questions down the front?
I was just going to ask, so obviously in the late 90s, we had the dot-com bubble where a bunch of companies went on the internet and they didn't have to, and everything just kind of went straight downhill from there.
Yeah.
But obviously the underlying technology was somewhat useful in the modern world. So do you feel the whole system of Web3 as a whole is completely useless, or is it more that it's kind of the wild, wild west right now? I agree that it is useless, but that's my personal opinion. And I disagree with the wild, wild west, because although there was a bit of wild, wild west when the dot-com bubble happened, there wasn't this level of fraud and scams, right? This is insane. Like, if this was happening in the banking industry on a daily basis, it would be on the news every night, right? Like, it's, and the thing is, look, maybe there is a use for blockchain that I'm not aware of, right? That we could actually do, but technically, don't we already have that? And I think it's called Git. You know, like, it's like, maybe we already found the use case. Look, I just want people to be protected. So, you know, really, I think the industry should be regulated. And I think you'd find if that happened, it would probably mostly disappear because, like I said, it's zero-sum by design.
Awesome. One last question over here. Pass that down that way.
So you talked about public ownership or government ownership. Is there any initiatives like that they've started, or are they thinking about it?
No, there isn't, which sucks, right? I mean, there are some people in America talking about it, but I think that's actually what needs to happen, right? We need to stop saying, oh, you know, a government's terrible at running this. Well, let's make a government good at running this, right? I know people push for privatization of synergy, and look, we're delving into my personal beliefs a little bit here, but that's okay. And you're allowed to disagree with me, but I believe our energy should be state-owned. You know, it kept our power prices lower most of the time. It leads to better things. This whole thing of choice in certain things is important, but when it's infrastructure, so really, maybe working in the tech space, we should all start pushing for that because it is needed.
Awesome. And can we give another round of applause to Alexander?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. He's going to be kidnapped briefly for a photo of all our speakers, but after that he will be in the foyer, and I'm sure you can track him down for any other questions. Thank you for joining us.